Snape's relationship with Harry Potter is a complex, tangled web of emotions that ultimately results in his mistreatment of Harry from day one at Hogwarts. But what we get in the movie isn't the full picture. While Harry's first potions class in the film shows a brief interaction of Snape attempting to humiliate Harry in front of the class, the book spends quite a few pages detailing this first interaction between these two characters. And this extends beyond just Harry and Snape's relationship as well. Harry's first week at Hogwarts in the Philosopher's Stone book is jam-packed with details about the school, its inhabitants, the classes, and it builds on crucial characters and relationships that will grow throughout the entire series. But because the movie had to cram the entire story into a couple of hours, they omit a massive amount of Harry's school year, especially this first week. We miss out on Harry's real interaction with Snape, which results in Gryffindor losing multiple house points, Neville giving himself boils after botching a potion, and descriptions of all of Harry's classes that he attends during the week, not just potions. My name is Gibby, and welcome back to episode 7 of Movies vs. Manuscripts, Harry Potter edition. This is the show where I analyze the Harry Potter films versus the books and point out all of the differences scene by scene. This week we are uncovering the start of Harry and Snape's feud that will last for years, and discovering the world of Hogwarts in a whole new way that the movie never shows. As always, I'll cover the changes across 4 major categories, which are characters, timeline, location, and plot. But first, we need to refresh our memory on what takes place during this scene in the movie. By the way, because of how this chapter starts and ends, we'll kind of be dipping into the next scene slightly, but we'll talk more about that at the end of the plot changes. For now, let's pick up where we left off last week, with Harry getting sorted and getting situated in his dorm room. We pick up the next morning with Ron and Harry running down the empty halls of Hogwarts, obviously late for a class. They enter a classroom out of breath, and as the cat is the only one sitting at the teacher's desk, Ron mutters to Harry something about how he's glad McGonagall isn't there yet. The cat then leaps off the desk and transforms into Professor McGonagall, which surprises both of the boys. She reprimands them, and then they find their seats, and we cut to the next class. This time they are in potions, and Snape enters the room to begin his monologue about how there is no wand waving in his class, and how only a select few will understand the subtle science and magic of potions. As he is speaking, Harry takes notes, but Snape calls him out for supposedly not paying attention. He then goes up to Harry and asks him random potion-related questions, all of which Harry is unable to answer. He states that obviously fame isn't everything, which gets a couple of laughs from the Slytherin side of the class. Then we cut to the students eating in the Great Hall, and we get our first taste of Seamus's explosive tendencies. Then mail delivery comes, which prompts Harry to take Ron's delivery of the Daily Prophet and read up on the news. He sees that the cover story is about a break-in at Gringotts, and he notices that it happened the same day he and Hagrid were at the bank. And that is where we cut off for this week. I know this is kind of in the middle of things, but trust me, it will make sense why once we get to the plot changes, as there are quite a few alterations they made for this scene. So let's waste no time and get right into our first 3 categories of characters, timeline, and location changes. First up is characters. In this scene, we see a whole bunch of people. Throughout the series, you'll find that I won't have time to name each person, as there are dozens of students and professors, but here are the main ones that are included in this scene. We have Harry, Ron, and Hermione, Snape, and McGonagall. The people not included in the scene, but explicitly mentioned in the book, are Filch and Mrs. Norris, Professors Sprout, Binns, and Flitwick, and last but certainly not least, Hagrid. As for timeline changes, it really just comes down to Harry's narration of his first week at Hogwarts, of which we only get a very small piece. In the book, he goes over the whole week, what he did, the characters he interacted with, how he feels about things, etc. So the movie kind of skips over this first week, which in the book has a very clear start and finish. Lastly, we have location, which again goes back to the whole concept of skipping over Harry's whole week at school. All of Harry's other classes are left out. This includes, but is not limited to, charms, herbology, history of magic, and astronomy, which really gets cut from the entire series. So on that note, let's dive into what Harry's first week at Hogwarts was really all about, and head into the plot changes. Let me preface this by saying that I can't get into every exchange of dialogue in the entire chapter, because we'd be here for hours, but I'll try my best to note lines or moments that are impactful and omitted or changed for the film. If you want to relive these moments in a whole new way and learn what was really said, then I'd encourage you to scroll down to the video description and claim your free audiobook on Audible using my link. It supports the channel and it gets you a free audiobook, so it's a win-win. So let's start off with an account of Harry's general thoughts and encounters during his first week. The start of the chapter is essentially Harry filling us in on what he has experienced so far, so here's a rundown of the main points he hits in this part of the chapter. Keep in mind, each of these points are excluded from the film. First, we learn at the beginning of this chapter that kids would follow Harry around to see his scar and would snoop on him when they thought he wouldn't be looking. He also realizes how hard it is to find classes as the staircases in Hogwarts move, portraits change, doors need special treatment like tickling to open, and other crazy stuff like that, which you would kind of expect in a magic castle. Third, he encounters Peeves quite a bit as the poltergeist enjoyed picking on first years. Harry says that he would drop trash on your head or play tricks on you while you walked around the halls, which often led to you being late to class. Fourth, Harry realizes that nobody likes Filch, and for good reason. He would catch you being lost and then say that you were up to no good and threaten to lock you in the dungeon. Harry mentions that Filch has a cat who could communicate with him, and anytime you saw the cat looking at you, Filch would turn up a minute later. Harry quickly learned that many students wish to give Mrs. Norris the cat a swift kick. And finally, Harry gives us a list of his classes and his first thoughts on each one. He says every Wednesday he had astronomy and had to look at the stars through a telescope at midnight. 3 times a week they had herbology with Professor Sprout. He says the most boring class was history of magic, taught by Professor Binns, who was a ghost. He had taught history for so long at the school that one day he got up out of bed and went to class without his body, and then just kept teaching. Professor Flitwick taught charms and was a tiny wizard who had to stand on a stack of books just to be seen. A funny note is that during Harry's first charms class, when Flitwick did roll call and came to Harry's name, he gave an excited squeak and then fell off his stack of books. Harry also mentions Transfiguration taught by McGonagall, but we'll get there in a moment as that has its own set of changes. And he doesn't mention potions at all, as at this point in the narrative he has not had that class yet. So the next change is in fact in regards to the Transfiguration class that we see at the start of this scene. First, Ron and Harry are not late for this class. I think this was just the filmmaker's way of showcasing what Harry had previously explained about getting lost in the castle. But technically, J.K. Rowling never wrote about the two boys being late to Transfiguration or having the exchange we see with Professor McGonagall. We do, however, hear a bit about the class generally in the book. We learn about their first Transfiguration class and how McGonagall gave them a severe speech at the beginning saying that Transfiguration is serious and not to be messed with. She then turned her desk into a pig and then back into a desk to the amazement of the class. But to the disappointment of the first years, they started out much smaller than that, as she had them trying to turn a match into a needle. Out of all of the students, Hermione was the only one to succeed, further reinforcing her future excellence in school. Next, a smaller detail they changed for the movie is the shared classes between Slytherin and Gryffindor. Technically, Harry notes in the next chapter that they only share potions with the Slytherin house, which he was fine with because he hates Malfoy. But in this scene, Draco and the other Slytherin first years are clearly shown in Transfiguration class. The next change is that the movie also leaves out his class with Professor Quirrell. Harry spent special time filling us in on this class in the book, as all of the first years looked forward to their first events against the Dark Arts class, but they were all let down as Quirrell just seemed to be scared the whole time. Harry notes that he had garlic in his classroom to ward off a vampire that he was worried was coming for him, and he said that he got his turban from an African prince who he saved from a zombie, but none of the kids believed that story. Seamus had asked him how he defeated the zombie, but Quirrell just went pink and started talking about the weather. They also noticed a funny smell coming from the turban, and the Weasley twins said that it was stuffed with garlic to protect Quirrell from the vampire wherever he went. Another moment the movie leaves out is their breakfast the morning before potions class. Essentially, Harry has been filling us in on the whole week, and at this point it is Friday, the day of his potions class. When they get the mail that morning at breakfast, Harry gets a letter from Hagrid inviting him to come down that afternoon to visit and fill him in on his first week at Hogwarts. Now, speaking of Harry's potions class, we finally have made it to this iconic moment of Harry and Snape's first encounter. Somehow, it's like 90% of the scene in the movie, but only half of the chapter in the book. But somehow the movie still left stuff out, or did they? You see, as we go over these changes, there are actually some parts that they did film, and are now in the extended version I talked about a few weeks ago. For now, I'm going to cover this as if it were the normal version, but I'll also fill you in later on what the extended version does actually show, so stay tuned for that. First up, this one seemed crazy to me, but Snape doesn't actually catch Harry taking notes while he's speaking. Harry is actually intently listening and watching Snape along with the rest of the class. Snape just randomly asks him the potion-related questions we hear in the movie, most likely to humiliate him. I guess in the movie they wanted to give Snape some sort of easy segue into this moment of interrogating Harry, but in the book it comes a little out of left field and you immediately get the sense that Snape has some sort of reason to dislike the boy, but we just don't know it yet. Next, after Snape finishes his last question to Harry, Harry tells him to try Hermione because she seems to know, as she is now standing with her arm fully extended in the air. The class laughs at Harry's remark, and this costs Gryffindor 1 point for Harry Harry's cheek. Speaking of that extended edition, this is actually a moment they did record, but removed from the film for time. As it turns out, as of this week, Peacock got the extended editions, at least here in the US, so if you have Peacock, check out the extended editions for some fun deleted scenes. By the way, a small change for the extended version of this scene is that Snape deducts 5 points from Gryffindor instead of 1. Next, we miss the actual class itself. In the movie, they cut right to the next scene after this exchange between Harry and Snape, but in the book, we actually hear about the rest of the class. Snape puts them into pairs to brew potions for the day, and Neville gets paired with Seamus right next to Ron and Harry. Neville, being Neville, somehow manages to create a potion that melts through Seamus's cauldron and then continues to expand and flow through the class. Everyone ends up standing on their stools to avoid the liquid, which got all over Neville, causing him to break out in boils and be in extreme pain. After getting carted away to the hospital wing, Snape took another point from Harry for not telling Neville he was doing it wrong, even though Harry wasn't partnered with Neville. Snape's reasoning for this was that Harry was trying to look good by letting Neville mess up right next to him. So far, this Snape guy seems to be a real nutcase. I always wondered if J.K. Rowling had thought far ahead into Snape's story at this point, or if he was just meant to be a stereotypical antagonist at the start. Next, we come to Harry's visit with Hagrid, which was removed from the film. After potions class, Ron asks Harry if he can join him on his way to Hagrid's. They go together, and this is when Ron meets Hagrid for the first time. Technically, he had seen him already, as Hagrid directs all of the first years across the lake to the castle their first night, but this is their first real introduction. Harry fills Hagrid in on his week and his most recent fiasco in potions class, and Hagrid tells Harry that it's rubbish that Snape doesn't like him, but Harry notices that Hagrid avoids eye contact with him when he says this, and he seems to be hiding something. Obviously, he knows why Snape doesn't like Harry, but this book won't reveal that truth, and again, I wonder if J.K. Rowling even knew at this point. Hagrid then asks Ron how his brother Charlie is, as Charlie is the one who works with dragons, and we already know that Hagrid really wants a dragon. Lastly, you know how I dipped a little into the next scene of them receiving mail in the Great Hall? Well, in that scene, Harry takes Ron's Daily Prophet paper and then reads the Gringotts break-in article. As we already know from our previous episode covering their time in the Hogwarts Express, Ron was already aware of the break-in because he had heard about it from his brother, but they didn't know the details until this article came out. But Harry didn't read the article in the Great Hall. He actually read it at Hagrid's. In the book, when he is with Hagrid, he takes the Daily Prophet paper from him and reads that the break-in happened on his birthday, the same day that he and Hagrid went to their vaults. He then asks Hagrid about it, and Harry notices that Hagrid definitely avoids eye contact this time. Harry then tucks away this information and continues to put together the puzzle pieces of this year's mystery at Hogwarts. But for this week, that's where our changes end. So what do you think about this week's differences? Do you think the movie was right to cut down this chapter to just a few minutes, or have you always wished that they would have showed more of Harry's first week at Hogwarts? I'm hoping that this new HBO series of Harry Potter is able to take the time to dive into all of these little details we miss in the movies due to time constraints, but I'm also hoping they don't butcher the whole thing. Can't wait to do a whole series on that TV show in a couple years. As for now, thanks for watching, and be sure to like and subscribe to stay tuned as I put new episodes out each week. Have a great week, and I'll see you in the next episode.